Hi there. So, I've decided to start this new channel for writing because, as somebody who writes, I've just published my third book. There's a miasma, for lack of a better word. It's a miasma out there. There's lots of it's a jungle. I'm going to go with jungle. Yeah, I like jungle. Jungle is probably the best word I could use for that. Give me 1 second. I'm just sending a tweet out. So you want to be a writer? Boom, go. Sorry. Writing, I've always been a writer. I've always loved to write. It's a sickness, for lack of a more colorful metaphor, and Lord knows I got those. But, I've always liked the creative aspect of things. I've written tons of epic poetry and what have you, and ever since I was a teenager. And it wasn't even the angst-ridden stuff. It was just all lovey-dovey stuff. It was the 70s, so it was pretty easy to do. But I've always had these characters in my head, and I always had these different, dare I say, voices. But just struggling to get out and just to get out there and be heard. And it's a lot of fun writing, but it's also a lot more work, because I think it's really easy to get caught up in the romance, as it were, of writing, of wanting to write, should I say. Everybody sees your Stephen King or your Belva Plain or your other writers out there and successful, and you're like, hey, I want to do that. I can do that. And but then you start doing it, and there's what do they call it? Writer's block. Sorry, turn that off. Yeah, because there's writer's block. There's the frustration of trying to find that perfect word. There's the frustration of trying to find that perfect sentence, paragraph. Make that you're writing that particular scene, and you want everybody to see what you're seeing. But in the long run, everybody has the one thing you have to reckon with is the fact that everybody's going to see it from their perspective, regardless of how you paint or draw the character. And what I mean by that is, for instance, one of my favorite books, in fact, the book that got me into being a geek and what have you, was Neuromancer. That got me into computers because I always had an insane love for computers. But there's a character in there, Molly. She's one of the mainstays in the book, and she's a brunette, and he describes her and blah 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 blah. But in my head, I mean, he can describe her all day. She's always gonna look like the lead singer from Thompson Twins. Now, I don't know if that's because I was so heavily involved in the Thompson Twins at the time. But she's blonde, and she's just wearing this badass black leather, got the mirrored eyes and all this stuff, and she's always going to look like that regardless. I could read that book. I've read the book probably about 50, 60 times. And every time she's still the blonde from Thompson Twins. Hold me now. Anyway, but what I'm getting at is, don't concentrate. One of the things I would put out there is not to concentrate so much on what your characters look like, because that's kind of a rabbit hole in its own right. But I'm all over the place, here, and so if you're going to tune into so you want to be a writer, that's something you should just get used to now, because I'm all over the place. I don't. In fact, I'm even on another podcast called The Digression, and it's called The Digression for a reason because I can't stay on topic. But either way, you got all those characters and in your head, and maybe you have a story idea. Maybe you got this and that. And there's like I said, there's all kinds of pitfalls and rabbit holes that you can get into that'll get you into trouble, or that'll be a very nice, comfortable place to be. But either way, you just got to get used to. It's not now. Maybe I'm sure there's some writers out there who are very mechanical. I'm a knuckle cracker too, so sorry. Just get used to that. Who are very boom, boom, boom. They're just by rote. It's like, okay, I do this, and then I do this, and I do this, and they're very formulaic in the way they approach it, and that's all fine and good. Because everyone's different. Myself, I'm not like that. In fact, I get a lot of people. They say, "Well, what's your process?" Oftentimes, my process can be something that is wholly unexpected. Because sometimes I'll get an idea for something just out of the blue, and I don't even know where the hell it came from. Like one time I was listening to a song by The Art of Noise, awesome band from the 80s, 90s, and the aughts a little bit. But it was, I think it was Promenade 2 or something like that. But I just had this vision, this image of this sprite dancing frenetically on stage, and then this old man, just kind of like a 200-year-old Angus Young coming out on this guitar, and his clothes are all rotted, and he's playing this guitar, and he's doing this, and a whip cracks out and hits him, and then another guy appears who is identical to him. But and then from that little imagery came The Fanatic, which I'm going to be novelizing. Right now it's in a novella format, and I'm going to be novelizing that next year. If not sooner, but more than likely next year. But you never know where the inspiration is going to come from. And you're going to have writer's block. You're going to have times when it's like, I don't know what to do here. And sometimes it'll stump you. And you'll just maybe even walk away from the project, because you don't know where to go with it. And sometimes that's okay. But other times, if you don't know what to write, just write. Because sometimes you're just going to have a confluence of ideas just crashing through your head, and you're not going to really know necessarily what up from down, left from right. But just write, and it might be something you completely delete later. But on the same token, it might be gold. You never know. Another thing they always say that always have a pen and paper with you, a journal book or now for me it's my phone. And always write down notes, because you'll never know when the inspiration is going to hit you. Just even if it's an idea, something you can just scribble down. It's like, boom, here, this, and just maybe you set it away and you come back to it later. But always keep those ideas fresh. And Jonathan Mayberry, one of my favorite writers, he writes a Joe Ledger series as well as Rotten Ruin, and there's another series he writes. Fantastic writer, really a lot of fun. But I read an interview with him where he said that Joe Ledger, the main character in the Joe Ledger series, came to him one time. I believe he was sitting in a coffee shop, and he was imagining this. He had these voices in his head that he was hearing this conversation about these two individuals, and or between these two individuals, and oftentimes you get stuff like that in your head. You'll just be like, oh, come on, let's be an adult. Let's think about this or think about that. And Mayberry just got it in his head to stop and let them talk. Just let them have their thing. I know it sounds crazy. It does sound crazy. But so what? What's normal? Normal's relative. And if you're a creative, there's really no such thing as normal as a standard. There's your normal, but never hold yourself to other people's normal. Unless your normal's really fucked up, then maybe you need to see somebody or take some medication for something like that, but you know what I mean. Like myself, I've got a lot of voices rattling around up here, and characters. I don't mean like voices like put the peanut butter in the place, nothing like that. But I got a lot of characters like that are just vying for attention, and it's important to listen to those, especially if you want to be a writer. Listen to those characters, let them organically go where they want to go. Because if you've got a good storyline and you've got the characters in your head already, and the storyline's in your head, well, if you just kind of halfway hand off the reins to those characters and let them do what they're going to do, you never know what might come out of that. And it's kind of cool, actually. It's what can happen, like, because I visualize. I've got a little bit of synesthesia. I visualize music, I see colors, and in my head I see colors, and I just let that happen. I don't try to quell that. I don't try to stomp on it and destroy that creativity, where a lot of people might, because of what other people might think. And another thing too, when it comes to what other people might think, don't worry about what other people might think. When I sat down, I've been writing sci-fi stuff for quite a long time, and halfway fantasy stuff, but I wanted to get into horror. I wanted to start writing horror, but my concern was that people might judge me, and I didn't obviously want to be judged or looked down upon as like someone evil or some stupid shit like that, or sick or demented, or which, well, take that for what it's worth. But I sat my wife down. I said, "Hey, man, we need to talk." And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Well, I want to talk to you about something that's really important to me, and I want to write horror." And she's like, that's what we have to sit down and talk about? You want to write horror? I'm like, yeah. That's why you came to me and said we need to talk? I'm like, oh, okay. Phrasing, context. Maybe I could use a little work on that. But write it. Write. I mean, if you've got something you want to write, you got something inside your head that's begging to be turned into ink and thrown onto a page, fucking do it, man. What do you got to lose? Writing is I don't know. It's a release. It's a jail cell. It's a beautiful thing, and it's something heinous that will just drag you along and force you to do things and write, or not force you to do things, but it'll just put you in positions to where it's frustrating sometimes. It's almost like a marriage to a degree. But if it's something you love and it's something you really want to do, then do it. And write because you want to write. Don't write to be rich, because that might not happen. Trust me, take it from me. I mean, I've written 5, 6 screenplays and feature-length screenplays. Haven't sold one of them. I've written 1 book of novellas. I've written 2 novels. I'm getting ready to work on a 3rd. Not rich yet. But I love to write. I love the characters, and when I'm writing those characters, it's almost like a drug, because you're breathing life into these characters, these people that are maybe not real, but for a little while they are. So if you want to be a writer, write because it's something you love to do, and let that stuff out of your head. Just get it out there, and don't be afraid. Throughout the series, I'm going to talk about a lot of things. I'm going to talk about, the concept of writing, the process of writing, at least mine. Like I said, I'm not necessarily formulaic like, a lot of writers will, because there's the, I forget what they call it. But yeah, this one, especially for screenwriting, you have your character, and he it's his process. It's the first act, second act, third act, and those are, don't get me wrong, those are intrinsic elements that need to be obeyed to a degree. But, if you look at a lot of the writers or even filmmakers who are out there now, like your Lars von Triers or your Terrence Malicks, those guys, they do whatever the fuck they want. And, you look now, I know I'm crossing boundaries here from book to movie, but the creative process is kind of the same to a degree. You know, Lars von Trier, man, has had people walk out of his screenings in Cannes, you know, and I don't think he gives a fuck because he keeps making movies. And you know what? Every time somebody walks out of a screening in Cannes, that makes me want to see it that much more. So you can't really, like I said, you can't really be afraid of what people are going to think of you or how it's going to be accepted. You know, because now that being said, you know, I've just published my second novel, Blood and Moonlight, and it's nerve-wracking. It really is, because now you're taking your baby, this thing that you've nurtured and you've grown and you've put it into this format and you've done this thing to it, and now you put it out there, and now the world will come back at you and judge you a little bit. But you know, it's as much as I say don't worry about that and let that go, it's still going to try and crawl up on you and get in your head. But you just have to let that go, because it's one of those things you really can't control so much. And why would you want to? You know, it's like, if you're going to approach it from an organic standpoint, then you might as well receive the response in that same fashion, if that makes any sense. So why do you want to be a writer? That's something that's important to ask yourself, because if you're doing it, like I said, to be rich, you're just going to be disappointed, and that's all there is to that. Maybe you will be rich. Maybe you are that Stephen King or that Clive Barker or that Dean Koontz, you know, whatever your favorite writer is, whatever your favorite genre is. You know, maybe you're that kind of guy who can just hit it and boom, you're out there, and you're famous and you're all this stuff. But more than likely, no, man, we're talking sperm and the egg as far as hitting that that golden nugget, as it were, getting the golden ticket, the Willy Wonka golden ticket in the chocolate bar. I wonder what they did with all the chocolate when the rich guy who had all his people opening all that chocolate. You think he just took it home? Probably just threw a lot of it away. Sorry. I wonder about things like this. I think about things late at night. I wonder. I don't recommend drinking a lot while you're writing, because then some days because I don't. That's something I don't do. But some days you might wake up and you'll say, who wrote that? What the hell was I thinking? So stay away from some of the imbibements. Some of the imbibements. Sorry, I just got to check something out here. Just remember, though, that those characters are, and be kind to your characters. You know, I mean, because there are certain things that happen with a character that they can get you back. You know, just treat your characters with the respect they deserve, because they're in there, they're in here, and they want to be there. And I think the more you can get them from here to there in the way that they want to get there, if that makes any sense, the better off you are in the long run. Does that make any sense? You can't answer that, but you could chat if you wanted to. There's some of the other things I'm going to be talking about during this whole process is software, different things that I use, different things you can use, different methods of processes that work, like I said, for me. And I think they could work for some of you, if nothing else. But I'm going to talk about software. I'm going to talk about some of my processes. I'm going to talk about other things as far as writing goes from a creative process. Because like I said, you know, with sometimes like I tend to compartmentalize a lot of things in my head, especially when I'm sleeping at night. There's a part of my brain that's wide awake, and that can be interesting because it sometimes feels like I'm not sleeping, but then a little time passes, and what I think is 5 minutes has actually been a few hours. So that works for me because what's happening usually there is I've got a lot of burners. I got a few sets of 12 burner stoves in my head basically, and I'm always percolating on ideas, or I'm percolating on problems I might be having in the story, or maybe I'm trying to find a juncture to split off a particular concept or a path, or maybe I'm trying to shoehorn another character into this or that within a story. And like I was struggling with the end of Blood and Moonlight for quite a while, and one night it was around 3:30 in the morning, and I just, boom, it hit me, and I'm like, oh my God, I know what I need to do now. And I woke my wife up, and I'm like, hey, I figured out the end of the story. Hey, check this out, and blah, 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 blah. And she's like, yeah, can I go back to sleep now, please? Yeah, go back to sleep. But, so don't try and control your brain so much when you're writing. Like I said, everybody gets caught up in normal and what's normal and the process. And there are books upon books upon books out there about writing and how to write. And the thing is, everyone's going to write in their own way. You're going to write in your format. So you can read book after book after book, and almost every book will contradict the last book as far as method. And that method is going to be yours and yours alone. So like I said, I'm going to be kind of all over the place every one of these podcasts, but I'm going to try to each podcast I want to do a kind of have an overall reason for the stream. Like this one, I just want to, so you want to be a writer. All right, so this is kind of a catch-all, the first one, obviously. But because I'm going to talk about the process, I'm going to talk about the writing process. I'm going to talk about the compiling process when you're getting ready to send this somewhere. I'm going to be talking about the different vendors, the different ways you can go. Because, with my first book, I know that I published pretty much strictly through Amazon CreateSpace, ACX. Audiobooks, that's another thing I'm going to talk about too. And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about pitfalls that you can have. Plus, there's just some other aspects of the process that can be very frustrating because, if you don't know, you don't know what you don't know. How about that? So that being said, this is kind of a primer for what I'm going to bring to the table. Now, a lot of people might say, well, dude, who the fuck are you? You're not on the New York bestseller time list. Yeah, you're right. I'm not. Not yet, anyway. But that doesn't take away from the fact that I'm a writer. And there are others of you out there who are writers as well. Maybe you're not, but you want to be. But personally, I think anybody can do anything they put their mind to it, too. So that being said, tune in because I'm gonna be I'd like to try to do a couple of these a week, if not more. Like I said, just to share my process. Like I said, right now I'm in the process of marketing Blood and Moonlight. It's a reimagining of Frankenstein from the ground up. I was always intrigued with the fact that we never really knew whether, because, Frankenstein's monster was originally composed of all these different parts and pieces and blah, blah, blah. But we never really find out if the brain is male or female. And that always intrigued me. So I decided, hey, let's make her female. Let's start with her childhood. Go from there. Yeah. And so, that's where that came from. The Fanatic is, like I said, I wrote the novella for the Fanatic back around 2010, I believe. And that one I'm really looking forward. In fact, that's going to be a sequel to Blood and Moonlight, because Blood and Moonlight is kind of it's not necessarily a sequel to Mr. Man, which was my first novel that I wrote back in 2014. But that takes place in the same universe. So, but I'm not going to dwell on like my stuff per se. I just want to talk about the process more than anything else. Some of the other things I'm going to talk about during this are going to be like burnout, because there is burnout out there as a particular story can go, and it cannot be pleasant when that happens. Because there's one story that novel that I was writing, and I really went hog wild on it, and I just kept going and going and going, and I wrote the bulk of the story within a year, which I don't know. Like I said, your Clive Barkers, your Stephen Kings, your Pattersons, they probably poop out 3-4 books a year, but I'm willing to bet that they have people working for them as well. I don't have people working for me. And so that was just me, and I burnt out on that story. And I keep trying to get back to it because, pardon me, it's a very complex telling, and it deserves to be finished with everything that I put into it. But I burnt out, and I burnt out to the degree that every time I tried to go back to it, every time I tried to just sit down and just scrawl down one word, I mean, there were times where I was just physically ill just at the thought of it. So that being said, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about burnout. I'm going to talk about respecting yourself, especially depending on where the energy for your writing comes from. Mine happens to come from a place, how do I say this? A lot of the energy that I have, or that I put into my writing, comes from a very dark place, very ugly place. I didn't have the most pleasant childhood, for lack of a more colorful metaphor. And so I got a lot of dark energy, as I like to call it, coming from that. And rather than let that consume me or define who I am, I just put that, or convert that into energy, as it were. And I put that energy or fuel, and I put that towards the writing. We'll talk, like I said, as time goes on, we'll talk more. I've even got, we'll talk a little bit about self-loathing. That's fun. Especially what you can do with it. It's not necessarily a negative thing, especially if you can figure out how to put it to work. Because that kind of stuff, self-loathing is kind of like fear. It's an advisor, but it never drives a situation, and i.e. you never let it behind the wheel, that kind of deal. But yeah, so like I said, this is just, I'm just trying to precurse everything we're going to be talking about as I move on with this. I think this could be fun. I hope you'll enjoy it. I think I'm going to enjoy it, if that makes any sense. Why are you doing it if you're not sure you're going to enjoy it? I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't question that kind of thing with myself. It's like there's a part of my brain that said, hey, we should do a live stream for other writers out there who might not necessarily know what they want to do, or how to start doing a thing. But that's okay. That's why we're going to be doing this. We're going to be talking about writing. And I'm going to really try hard to stay on task, because sometimes I don't do that. And that's okay too. A little bit. As long as I don't stray too far from the subject. So other than that, and occasionally you might see my cats, because they like walking across the desk, and they usually want treats, which I keep in a drawer, which they know exactly where that is. But yeah, so I'm going to have a live chat too. So whenever you're checking out the stream, got a question, ask a question. I'll do the best I can to answer it. So yeah, that is going to wrap this up, and I'm hoping this actually sounds decent. So if you have any questions or suggestions, you can email me on the channel here or message me on the channel. And yeah, so I think we're going to have some fun. I think you'll learn a lot. I think I might even learn a lot. Plus, I'll give you some little publishing shortcuts and stuff. Not necessarily shortcuts, but just publishing things I've learned the hard way that hopefully you don't have to learn the hard way. And yeah. So other than that, I think I'm out of here. And you have yourself a good night. It's hot outside, at least where I am. 90 and change. Yuck. Whatever, man. So